Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, Jared Kushner unveils Trump's real estate plan for a so-called new Gaza. A path might be clearing for Andy Burnham to take a swing at Labour leadership. Zack Polansski tells Palantir to sod off, and Keir Starmer appears to want credit for the new Greenland deal, whatever it even actually is. I'm Helena, aka No Justice MTG, and I'm delighted, as always on Ladies' Night, to be joined by Dalia Gebrial. Dalia, how are you doing on this fine Thursday evening?
I'm doing all right. I mean, it's been a crazy week. I guess like 2026 is on a war path. It's not been a slow news week, let's say that. So I'm glad that we're here to chat about some of the headlines today.
If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. And as ever, don't forget to let us know what you think in the comments. Our top story tonight. Davos, the site of the annual World Economic Forum, is used to being completely overrun by neoliberal corporatist suits once a year. This year, however, there's a new group in town, the neo-imperialists, also known as US President Donald Trump's closest circle. Today, they took the stage at Davos, where they launched Trump's Board of Peace. The presidential son-in-law, Jared Kushner, laid out their plans for Gaza's redevelopment.
Gaza, as President Trump's been saying, has amazing potential, and this is for the people of Gaza. We've developed it into zones. In the beginning, we were toying with the idea of saying, let's build a free zone, and then we have a Hamas zone. And then we said, you know what, let's just plan for catastrophic success. Hamas signed a deal to demilitarize. That is what we are going to enforce. People ask us what our plan B is. We do not have a plan B. We have a plan. We signed an agreement. We are all committed to making that agreement work. There's a master plan. We'll be doing it in phasing. In the Middle East, they build cities like this in 2-3 million people. They build this in 3 years. And so stuff like this is very doable if we make it happen.
Oddly, that's not super reassuring to hear that the powers steadily taking control of Gaza have no plan B if things that are very volatile and traumatized region don't go their way. Kushner went into a few of the highly profitable details.
Rafah will start with. This will show a lot of workforce housing. We think this could be done in 2-3 years. We've already started removing the rubble and doing some of the demolition. And then New Gaza. It could be a hope, it could be a destination, have a lot of industry, and really be a place that the people there can thrive, have great employment. Once this starts going, we think there should be 100% full employment and opportunity for everybody there. And we have a lot of data on what can be, but we think that this really gives the Gazan people an opportunity to live their aspirations. But it all starts with security, and it all starts with governance.
Now, there's a lot to say about that plan. The first is that it nowhere mentions the consent of the Palestinians who own the land that all the development is set to take place on. No more olive groves, no more traditional features of Palestinian culture, just Dubai 2.0, with swathes of coastal tourism development, data centres, and what is being called advanced manufacturing. Let's remember, there are still potentially thousands of bodies beneath the rubble that these shiny towers are intended to be built upon. The second is that many in Israel will hate it, because it appears to rule out the building of Israeli settlements on the territory. You'd be forgiven for thinking that Kushner's presentation was one of those striking moments where capitalist fantasy takes flight from political reality. But let's assume that New Gaza is something that Palestinians do actually want. As Kushner said, there are two key issues that remain major sticking points in the region. The first is security.
So demilitarization, this is something we're starting now that we have a new government in Gaza. This government will be working with Hamas on the demilitarization to really take the principles that were agreed to in the document to the next phase, and hopefully that will be successful. Without that, we can't rebuild. So if Hamas does not demilitarize, that will be what holds back Gaza and the people of Gaza from achieving their aspiration, and that's very important. So the next 100 days, we're going to continue to just be heads down and focused on making sure this is implemented. We continue to be focused on humanitarian aid, humanitarian shelter, but then creating the conditions to move forward.
Now, I'll get on to Gaza's new so-called government in a moment. The main question when it comes to security is what possible incentive does Hamas have to demilitarize? Is the US providing security guarantees against further Israeli incursions into the territory if they do? That seems unlikely. Is the US threatening Israel with sanctions or other economic obstacles to simply go to war with Gaza again? They haven't in the past. Instead, the Peace Board appears to be imposing what Kushner called a government, but which is in fact a technocratic caretaker regime on Palestinians in the Strip. The 15-member committee announced earlier this week is made up entirely of Palestinians. Gershon Baskin, co-director of the Alliance for Two States and a former negotiator, told the media line this about how the Committee for National Administration in Gaza was selected. The Palestinian National Committee for Gaza has been established. It was officially announced by the Egyptians. There was a meeting of all the Palestinian factions in Cairo to present it to them, including Hamas. All the Palestinian factions agreed to it and blessed it. There are no current members of Fatah. There are people who might have been associated with Fatah in the past. All of them are considered independents. All of them have been vetted by Israel, the US, Egypt, Jordan, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and even Hamas got to comment on them. It took 3 months to form it because all these different interest groups were pulling in their own directions and trying to put their own names. At the end of the day, it was an American decision. That's all very well, but the question remains whether the committee has any political legitimacy amongst Palestinians. They haven't been elected, and they also fall under the executive of Trump's Board of Peace, which doesn't contain a single Palestinian. And they've been landed with some pretty serious responsibilities, not least of all the demilitarization of Hamas and internal security. Let's look at what that entails. Among other things, the committee will be responsible for decommissioning all heavy weapons, tunnels, and military infrastructure in the Strip. They're also charged with running a police force that will be responsible for registering and decommissioning personal arms, except where they authorize people to own guns. And only when they've done all that will Israeli forces withdraw and Gaza get the economic investment promised in Kushner's real estate plan. That's quite a lot. It's so much that if I were being cynical, I'd describe the committee as the perfect fall guys. But its new chairman, Ali Shath, a civil engineer, seemed upbeat in this pre-recorded message to Davos.
It is an honor to be here today. I want to start by thanking President Donald J. Trump and his administration for their intensive efforts to advance peace in the whole region. I also thank Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Qatar, and Turkey as mediators, the Palestinian Authority, and members of the United Nations Security Council for welcoming the comprehensive peace plan. These efforts created the opportunity for a new future in Gaza Strip. But what will really matter is what comes next. This transition will succeed only if it delivers real, tangible improvements in daily life for Gazans. As Chief Commissioner of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, it's my responsibility to turn this moment into action, to restore order, to rebuild institutions, and to create a future for the people of Gaza defined by opportunity and dignity, under the principle of one authority, one law, and one weapon. As a first step, I am pleased to announce the Rafah crossing will open next week in both directions. For Palestinians in Gaza, Rafah is more than a gate. It is a lifeline and symbol of opportunity. Opening Rafah signals that Gaza is no longer closed to the future and to the war. I want to be clear, there is much more work ahead, and none of it is easy. The road forward will involve difficult decisions and setbacks, but this is a real step, and it marks a new direction. Today I ask the international community not only to support this effort, but to work with us. Judge us by our actions. Hold us to clear standards and stand with the people of Gaza as we take this responsibility for our future.
There was a bit in the middle of that video that was in Arabic, but where Shath addressed, as he said, the people of Gaza. You have remained steadfast and preserved your families in your lands during difficult, lean years that tested your depths in every limit. Your legendary steadfastness is the greatest offering Gaza has given, and it is the foundation upon which we will build our future together. This moment is not for looking back, but for moving forward towards a prosperous and bright future, a future where our children grow up without fear or anxiety, where work is rewarded, schools are opened, and daily life regains its stability and security. The coming stage requires the concerted efforts of everybody, but you will not be fighting alone. Your voices have weight, your actions have impact, and your commitment to peace and the rebuilding of your communities will define the features of the new Gaza Strip. Step by step, with discipline and determination, we will build a capable Gaza, capable of self-reliance, and we will build it into a centre for freedom, opportunity, and peace. Dalia, what do we think of these new arrangements for Gaza?
I mean, the idea of olive trees that have been in people's families for generations being ripped up to make room for high rises is so disgusting and is so emblematic of this like hollow American corporatist idea of freedom, where, of course, the only thing that anyone could ever want, the only freedom that anyone could ever aspire to, is the freedom to like buy a McDonald's and live in, the Trump Tower. We're not talking about a fucking timeshare, like, which is what the tone of that Jared Kushner video was. Like, we're talking about a people that have been around for like thousands and thousands of years, who have experienced the most unimaginable violation of their dignity and sovereignty as human beings over the past 100 years. I think it's very clear this is not a peace plan. This is a recolonization plan. The only thing really that is being renegotiated here is what boots are on the ground. Before it was Israeli boots, it was militarized boots. It will still have to, there will still have to be an ongoing military presence within the Gaza Strip in order to maintain this kind of hollow fantasy that Kushner has cooked up here. But now we're looking at suits and boots from the transnational corporate class, who have basically anointed themselves as the rightful leaders of a nation that, as I said, have thousands of years of history, who still have not been given the right that we all should have, and that we all nominally at least have, which is the right to self-determination. And the way that people in Gaza are being spoken about, not as a people who have been robbed of their sovereignty, their livelihood, their right to self-determination. They have lost their children have been killed in unfathomable numbers. The people who have survived the past 2 years are likely to face long-term, lifelong physical and psychological damage as a result of being pushed to the brink of starvation. They're not being spoken about as people who deserve not only sovereignty, liberation, but reparations. They're being spoken about as essentially an asset on a balance sheet, a site for investment and money making for the world's elite. Now, what is somewhat interesting, I guess, is, and whether or not any of this is possible is completely undecided. I think who knows? But I do think that this does maybe signal a bit of a shift in the relationship between Israel and the US, not insofar as the difference is not about whether or not Gaza and the Palestinians should be colonized. But I think I said on the show a few months ago that when people were saying, is there a cleaving between the Trump administration and the Israeli state? And I said, the only kind of disagreement that's going to happen is not about whether or not the Palestinians should be sovereign, but is about who should have a say and ultimate governing power over the Gaza Strip in a post-war context. Now, I do think that the plan, a Kushner-led Gaza, is going to definitely make it very easy for Israeli governance and Israeli business, the business class, to have full access to the Gaza Strip. But will that satisfy the more kind of theocratic elements of Israeli society and Israeli politics, for whom it's actually not just about like resource control, but it's a kind of religious identity politics that's going on, and that it matters to them that this is not just land that is occupied by Israeli finance or Israeli governance or Israelis in collaboration with the US, but actually it's important to them that this land is called Israel. So whether or not they will accept it, I don't know. I think if the chance is that those more theocratic elements of Israeli politics become a point of friction to this pathway, I think they will be very quickly marginalized. Ultimately, nothing beats American business. But we have to be very clear as well that the plan here is to further deny the Palestinians of their sovereignty, because what we have to remember here is that despite this being a peace plan, peace and silence aren't the same thing. And the vision that we see here, and the vision in all those infographics and visuals and films and whatever it was, what we see there is Palestinian silence. And that is the dream. That is the vision. We see a playground for the rich where local Palestinians basically serve nothing but kind of cheap labor, and serve the tourist industry, the real estate industry that they see as flourishing in this new Gaza Strip. But that is not peace. That is silence. Peace is something that can only follow justice. Peace is something that can only coexist with freedom. And despite the idea that this is a Palestinian-led committee, what you see in that kind of list of characteristics of the new committee is it says Palestinian-led, in brackets, what's the term? Internationally verified. So it's not Palestinian-led, because Palestinian-led doesn't just mean people with Palestinian identity on the board. Palestinian-led means chosen by the Palestinians. It means led by people who the Palestinians have chosen for themselves. So the goal here, I guess, is to kind of reorganize the balance of colonial power within the region rather than to actually decolonize Palestine. And the only thing I can see shifting is and I don't think this will be the case, but what they are probably trying to angle towards is not having to rely so much on Israel for the US, the West, to maintain a base of power in the area. Because if you have this part of the Gaza Strip, which is, very important strategically and geopolitically, if the US was able to gain essentially wholesale control through this kind of corporate governance, then perhaps they wouldn't have to rely on Israel as much to be the kind of policeman on the ground. But for the Palestinians themselves, the end result is the same, which is no sovereignty, no self-determination. And that has always been the essence of the Palestinian struggle.
The presentation of Washington's Gaza plan was only part of Trump's Davos advertisement for his new Board of Peace, with the US president launching the organization by describing his ambitions for it.
That's where the Board of Peace really started. And I think we can spread out to other things as we succeed with Gaza. We're going to be very successful in Gaza. It's going to be a great thing to watch. And we can do other things. We can do numerous other things. Once this board is completely formed, we can do pretty much whatever we want to do. And we'll do it in conjunction with the United Nations. I've always said the United Nations has got tremendous potential, has not used it. But there's tremendous potential in the United Nations. And you have some great people at the United Nations. But so far it hasn't. On the 8 wars that I ended, I never spoke to the United Nations about any of them. And you would think that I should have. You would think they could have done those 8 wars, but they couldn't have. And they tried, I guess, in some of them, but they didn't try hard enough. But there's tremendous potential with the United Nations. And I think the combination of the Board of Peace with the kind of people we have here, coupled with the United Nations, can be something very, very unique for the world. It's for the world. This isn't United States. This is for the world.
He did seem kind of bored when he was speaking there. It reminds me of some of his more zany speeches on the campaign trail. And now Trump's Board of Peace has had some takers. The leaders of the 19 countries who've agreed to be members were lined up on stage behind the president as he unveiled the signed charter for the Board of Peace. They include Israel, Egypt, Belarus, Argentina, and Hungary. But the list of countries who have refused or ignored Trump's invitation to join is much longer, including every major Western ally of the United States. But Trump did get one powerful endorsement for an organization well known for its international political good sense. This was FIFA president Gianni Infantino.
Of course, we live in a divided world, and of course we support peace. We have seen earlier this morning the Board of Peace with President Trump signing this this agreement, this declaration. There is full support from FIFA to President Trump, to all the members of the Board of Peace, because we all have to support peace, we all have to unite, and we bring people together.
I mean, it's true, football does bring people together, but I don't know why FIFA are commenting on things such as international relations. Well, of course, FIFA is, and the football more broadly as a sport is something that is an international institution, and it is a form of soft power if you have access to FIFA. Of course, given that the World Cup is in the United States, at least partially, it's interesting that FIFA seems to want to suck up to Trump, given the threat of a boycott from many people, from fans, for example, going to the United States, given that over half the nations playing in the World Cup are from non-majority white countries, meaning that a bunch of their fans, even players, do they think that they're going to be safe from ICE in the United States? I don't think so. So FIFA does genuinely have a vested interest in wanting to be on Trump's side when it comes to geopolitics, given what it's like domestically in the United States as well. Dalia, what did you make of Mr. Infantino's intervention there?
I mean, there I was worrying about Palestinian self-determination and what is this going to mean for like the people of Gaza being able to define their own future. And I forgot to think about, does the chair of FIFA think this is a good idea? I can't believe, I call myself a commentator, I call myself an analyst. I can't believe I didn't think to wonder what the chair of a football organization thinks about the rights to self-determination of a people who have been under occupation for 100 years. That's my bad. I'm so sorry, guys. I really let you down. Also, just a side note as well, it was after I had said all that about the way that this is like a kind of form of American capitalist or kind of corporate capitalist recolonization of the strip. And then you cut to that clip of Donald Trump being like, once we get control of Gaza, we'll basically be able to do whatever we want. My case in point. And I mean, when it comes to the FIFA situation, I mean, there have been many things about a Trump-led world that have been really agonizing to watch. And I think one of the most agonizing things, actually, okay, it's not really up there, but on a superficial level, I guess it is the kind of backslapping club that has emerged between some of the worst men that have ever walked this earth. And one of those is Gianni Infantino, a man who after Trump threw his toys out of the pram because he wasn't awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, which at this point is basically just a trinket, they'll give it to anyone, created the FIFA Peace Prize to give to Donald Trump so he would feel a little bit better about being snubbed by the Nobel Prize Foundation as some kind of participation trophy. So I think for me, it's just watching the way in which Trump's machismo kind of politics has just been so effective around the world of making men who ostensibly think of themselves as very powerful kind of roll over and show their bellies in the hope that Donald Trump will give them a pat on the head. It's just a bit embarrassing. But it is quite interesting, actually, with the World Cup, because obviously there was a lot of conversations around should we boycott the World Cup around when it was hosted in Qatar because of Qatar's record on gay rights and the treatment of migrant workers. And there were kind of two camps. There was like, how it's hypocritical to boycott Qatar when there are many other countries that have hosted the World Cup that have committed human rights abuses. And then there were people who were like, no, this is unconscionable. Qatar have bought this is a form of Qatar's like self-sanitizing, PR exercise to cover for deep and unconscionable human rights abuses. And I guess it's somewhere kind of in between. There's sort of parts of both of those arguments that are somewhat right. The question of the US does kind of throw a lot of that into sharp relief, because if we're going to talk about, prejudice or the violation of the rights of queer people, that is something that the US is guilty of. Trump's America is guilty of. We're going to talk about the abuse of migrants. That is something that is very much present in Trump's America. We're going to talk about attack on women's rights, Roe v. Wade being overturned. Women in many states now no longer have access to one of the foundational principles of reproductive rights. And so there is a case to be made that, obviously, if you're going to talk about boycotting Qatar, you can't really then in the same breath say that the World Cup going ahead in the US in Trump's America is somehow not problematic. And we are seeing with not just in amongst football federations in the global south, but even within Europe. And there have been some conversations within UEFA, for example, over the past week about if Trump does go ahead with invading Greenland, which would be seen as a kind of middle finger up to Denmark, which is in Europe, that maybe there will be conversations around some European clubs boycotting the US if that invasion goes ahead. So, look, I'm not looking to UEFA to kind of be a bastion of principles. But it is interesting how now that Trump is kind of turning some of that sharp American edge onto Europe, that some of these European institutions are suddenly starting to realize that maybe it's not good that we have this corporate global hegemon that views the world as its resource playground and, is willing to kind of do whatever needs to be done to secure their geopolitical position.
Yeah, interesting the talk about like relationship between FIFA and Qatar. And FIFA is very close to lots of the Gulf states in that way. As an institution, it's always kind of sucked up to power, just like, Infantino did there with Donald Trump and the United States, right? And football is a form of soft power. These kind of international competitions are soft power. Like, it's not just for money. The petrochemical billionaires are buying Premier League clubs. That is a form of soft power that they want to have access to. And this enmeshing of football and politics is something that needs a lot more scrutiny. And this is just yet another example of that. Keir Starmer is a dead man walking, politically speaking, of course. His approval ratings are the worst on record for a prime minister this early in their tenure, and his government is polling at less than half of their vote share at the last election in some polls. Given these catastrophic polling numbers, bookmaker William Hill currently have the PM at 4-6 odds to resign this year, around a 60% chance. And there has been many column inches devoted to a potential successor to Starmer in recent months. If he were to resign, potentially after a difficult spring statement or a humiliating defeat in the local elections, the Labour membership would be tasked with electing a new leader. Last year, it was revealed that even members of Starmer's inner circle had been allegedly preparing for his inevitable downfall. Health Secretary Wes Streeting was forced to pour water over rumours of his potential leadership ambitions in November after an anonymous briefing was circulated in the press. Streeting's biggest obstacle in the event of Starmer's resignation, however, is that he's not popular with the Labour membership. Whilst he's a darling of the UK media, Streeting is far less popular with Labour members than the other big name floated as a potential Starmer successor in Andy Burnham. As we have discussed on the show before, the biggest hurdle for Burnham to either challenge the current leadership or run for leader if Starmer does resign is that he's not currently a Member of Parliament. He's currently the Mayor of Greater Manchester and will be until his term ends in 2028. For him to run for leader, he would need to resign as Mayor and then run in a potential Westminster by-election. Speaking of which, MP for Gorton and Denton Andrew Gwynn announced his retirement. Now his pension settlement has been approved by the House of Commons, despite his claims last year that he intended to serve the full term. His future was called into question when he had the Labour whip removed after scandalous WhatsApp group messages had leaked, where he allegedly hoped a 72-year-old constituent would soon be dead after asking about the bins. Just the highest quality candidates, of course, in McSweeney's Labour Party. Despite the Labour Party's tanking brand image, Burnham is still incredibly popular in Manchester, where Gwynn's constituency is located, earning him the affectionate nickname of King in the North, after a character in HBO's Game of Thrones. If Burnham were to be the candidate in the forthcoming by-election, he would likely win, but being selected is nowhere near a dead cert. Labour candidates are voted on by constituency members from a shortlist approved by Labour's National Executive Committee, and that's where Burnham's problems lie. Here's the dilemma explained by Sky News' political editor Sam Coates, as Starmer and his Chief of Staff Morgan McSweeney's Politburo have been changing things in the background that would create many hurdles for him. There is a new rule, announced in the 2026 Labour Rulebook, about mayors wanting to become an MP. It says directly elected mayors and police and crime commissioners must seek the express permission of the NEC/SEC/WEC as applicable before seeking nomination as Labour candidates for the Westminster Parliament. Their decision shall be final. So there's plenty of provision for the NEC to close ranks around Starmer, using the excuse around the potential for a damaging and expensive mayoral contest in Burnham's stead to prevent him from resigning his mayoral post to stand as the candidate in the by-election. As Coates goes on to say, even if he were granted the opportunity to seek the nomination, the NEC could still refuse to shortlist him for the CLP to vote on. If Burnham is granted permission to apply for the seat, the NEC does a long and a short list. The long list over email, then the shortlisting is done by a panel. The panel has 3 members of the NEC, 1 member of the board and a local constituency representative. The panel is chosen by the Office of the General Secretary, Holly Ridley, who is close to Morgan McSweeney, and she decides the panel. Whilst the NEC has elected members serving on it from within the Labour Party, the McSweeney wing of the party has control, and the chair is Labour Together stalwart Shabana Mahmood. So Burnham's chances look outside at best, and Jessica Elgert from The Guardian got some confirmation of her own. Asked several NEC members what the chance is of Burnham getting selected to fight a by-election. All said 0. This provides a real catch-22 for Labour. If they do block Burnham from running, they will not only face a revolt from their own membership, although you'd think it would be a bit late for this given how many candidate stitch-ups the Politburo has already engineered. The party would also turn a near-guaranteed hold, due to Burnham's personal popularity, to a by-election contest that they could suffer a humiliating loss in. According to the pollster electoral calculus, in a vacuum on current polling, the seat is a 3-way race between Labour, Reform and the Green Party, with the Greens predicted to just pip Labour to the post by 0.7%. Reform UK are only 3 points behind Labour according to this model too, meaning the by-election could be a real bloodbath. Lots of commentators are fixated on this as a Reform-Labour contest. However, the political media class have been pretty silent on the rising support for Zack Polankski's Green Party. And YouGov has done a 17,000-person megapoll, which shows just how much Labour support has shifted leftward. It shows that only 38% of Labour's 2024 voting cohort plan to vote for them again, a staggering drop in support, and that the party sweeping up the most ex-Labour support is the Greens, which vindicates the idea that they're best placed to pick up urban Labour ex-strongholds such as Gorton and Denton. This is the consequence of Labour's rightward shift under Starmer and McSweeney. They not only constantly deride their base in the media and circumvent party democracy, but their policy has been aimed at picking up Reform voters rather than energising their base. The result of which is that in this YouGov poll, that they have won over precisely 0 2024 voters from Reform. Just another episode in the storied career of electoral supergenius Morgan McSweeney. Dalia, what do you think will be the outcome of, first of all, the NEC's deliberation on letting Burnham stand as a candidate, and second of all, the election in the scenarios whether they do select him or whether they don't?
Look, I mean, when it comes to what's going to happen with the NEC, I think it remains to be seen. It depends on just how willing they are to continue flogging this dead horse. I mean, Keir Starmer, it's over. It is over, and I'm truly confused about why they keep trying to pretend that this is something that can be revived. He has broken records of unpopularity, and it cannot be recovered at this point. It's done. But I think when you look at the kind of insanity that Keir Starmer has surrounded himself by, he surrounded himself with people who it seems will hold on to even just nominal forms of power, because in terms of actual power to get things done, power to the power of legitimacy amongst the public, that's gone. But in terms of just institutional nominal power, they will hold on until the absolute bitter end, whatever it means for the party, whatever it means for the country. And so it just depends, how craven are they willing to go in order to hold on to these very nominal, superficial forms of power that actually don't translate to any kind of real form of power, because they have no legitimacy amongst the Labour base, they have no legitimacy amongst the general public. Andy Burnham, Andy Burnham is quite literally Labour's only hope at this point. And I don't say that because I necessarily think Andy Burnham is like the answer to all of Britain's problems. And I don't say it necessarily to say that if Andy Burnham did become leader of the Labour Party, then this would revive the Labour Party as an electoral force in Britain, that Labour might win the next election. I don't know about that. Andy Burnham is not as tested on a kind of national stage, but where he has been tested, he's performed a lot better than Keir Starmer, to say the least. I say that Andy Burnham's the only hope is because Andy Burnham is the only high-profile Labour politician that is still in the party, that is not stained by an association with Keir Starmer. He, by being the mayor of Manchester, which is, a relatively sort of autonomous role, it kind of doesn't it's not as hamstrung by the Labour leadership as, say, being an MP is. He's not subject to things like the whip, etc. So he's not been pushed into those corners that many of the other Labour MPs have been pushed into. So he has been able to build a political identity, a brand, a record that is independent of Keir Starmer's Labour, something that no one else has been able to do, because Keir Starmer's Labour has been either you fall in line with Keir Starmer or you get purged. And Andy Burnham is one of the few politicians who has been able to kind of fall into the gap between those two realities. So if anyone in the Labour Party is actually serious about trying to revive this thing and to win the next election, Andy Burnham is probably the only person who could do it. I don't know what the chances are. I don't know if he actually would be able to do it, if he would be able to pull it off. But on a theoretical level, he's probably the only one that would be able to. In terms of Morgan McSweeney, I mean, the thing about Morgan McSweeney is that he was kind of given free range of running the post-Corbyn Labour Party, because he had this reputation of knowing how to beat the far right. And he got that reputation because he had been portrayed as being instrumental to being able to defeat the BNP in Barking and Dagenham. So they had, 12 seats on the council. It was one of the BNP strongholds back in the day. And the myth goes that Morgan McSweeney came in and he knew how to speak to potential reform voters and swing them to Labour. The idea was that he didn't get involved in all of the sort of loony lefty indulgences like the humanity of trans people and the humanity of migrants, these kind of very silly issues that we like to preoccupy ourselves with. He focused on things like patriotism, crime, and sort of everyday issues like potholes and bins and all of that, which does tend to win quite well in local elections. Whether that can be scaled on a national level is another question. But he kind of got this myth of knowing how to bring reform voters or potential reform voters into the Labour fold. And what better time? What better time to hire someone like that than when Reform are nipping at the ankles of the Labour Party, when Reform are threatening to take Labour strongholds. But the problem with that myth is that it's a myth. It's a story that Morgan McSweeney has told about himself. But when we actually look at what happened in Barking, it wasn't that Morgan McSweeney's campaigning was able to, and first of all, you can never say that one person is responsible for a political outcome. It's very difficult to prove something like that. But even looking at the data that we have and the data that we can read, what you see is not that Morgan McSweeney was able to communicate with potential reform voters and push them into becoming a Labour voter. In fact, the BNP in Barking and Dagenham, their vote share actually went up in terms of the number of votes that they got actually went up in that infamous election. And it went up at a time when in the surrounding areas, surrounding boroughs, the BNP vote went down, which also suggests that there was an overall trend beyond Barking and Dagenham that the BNP was losing support in general in the area. What actually happened was that people who are Labour voters were more activated to come out and vote in the council elections. So it's actually the exact opposite of the strategy that we have been told is so necessary at this moment and is the one that Morgan McSweeney is an expert at. It's not actually about converting people who are wanting to vote for reform and who are diehard reform voters. or diehard BNP voters, that it's actually about mobilizing the Labour base so that that far-right contingency is drowned out. And we have seen a repetition of that mistake right now. We have seen that the number of reform voters who have been converted to vote for Labour is zero. McSweeney has once again failed to do that, as he failed to do in Barking and Dagenham. But crucially, he's actually gone a step further in terms of the failure, because he's also alienated Labour voters, which was key to defeating the BNP in Barking and Dagenham. Now, why those Labour voters came out in larger numbers, I don't know. I don't think it was because of Morgan McSweeney, because Morgan McSweeney is notoriously thinks very little of Labour voters. He takes them for granted. He thinks they're a bunch of loony lefties. He's not interested in them. He doesn't want to talk to them. So I don't know. I don't live in Barking. I didn't live in Barking at the time. I don't know what were the factors of play that meant that the Labour vote was more mobilised during that time. But we know that that's not Morgan McSweeney's strategy. So Morgan McSweeney should not be taking credit for it. And on a national scale, when you scale up his strategy of disdain for Labour voters and the courting of far-right voters, once again, it has failed. And it has failed with far more drastic consequences, because now we're not talking about a dozen or so seats on the council. We're talking about the government of this country.
The thing is, Andy Burnham had an article today talking about Manchesterism, the thing that he's applied to his mayoralty, as a kind of a solution for the government's problems. And whilst I'm no Andy Burnham fan, the big things, the four pillars that he identifies as causing the problems that we have: austerity, deregulation, privatization, and deindustrialization. That's a pretty comprehensive analysis of the reasons why we're in a very problematic position in this country. I mean, that's what we on the left have been saying have been the problems for ages, right? We know that austerity was this big issue, and I think it was during the period where Labour was an anti-austerity party that maybe Burnham kind of learnt from his older mistakes. I don't mean to try and say that all of this is necessarily sincere, but the project is sound. And tackling those four problems are the way to win back those voters who've abandoned the Labour Party, given that the current iteration under Starmer is doing nothing to solve those issues. And so I think you're right. If Labour do want to at least not be wiped out at the next election, they have to find somebody who targets the concerns of Labour voters with precision. And that's what Burnham is, at least his prospectus for government, would be approaching. It's nowhere near obviously as radical. It wouldn't fundamentally change a lot of things in the country that I think are necessary to change, but it would certainly change things that this Labour government haven't even bothered looking at. Look at the water industry, for example, as well. And if they don't select him, and the Labour base is even more demoralised at the state of their own party, and they have to run a by-election with a candidate that is nowhere near as popular, I don't know. I think the Green Party are well placed to take Gorton and Denton, and that will only accelerate in people's minds that Labour are finished and Greens are the insurgents. Every single time that there is a local or by-election or a devolved election and Labour do badly and the Greens do better, it solidifies in the mind of voters that actually it's not a protest vote anymore, and you can move away from Labour for something that promises some kind of hope, which is what will drive people to the polls, especially a by-election when turnout is low. So that's the real curse of, as you have pointed out, McSweeney's dictatorial control over the internal processes of the party, is that all it's done is lead to an exodus of supporters, and it's won over, as we've seen from the polling, literally nobody. 0% of 2024 reform voters in that YouGov poll say they're going to vote Labour. That's a catastrophic failure of strategy. But again, like, the mythology of McSweeney, other than the Barking and Dagenham contest, was built up over Labour's success at the election. When you look at the internal data, they also won over very few people then. Their voting percentage was only slightly higher than 2019, and their total votes was lower. It was a real mythology that was built up over the accidental prime minister, the accidental election victory, a none of the above landslide, which is, that's not a vote of confidence. And their time in government has shown that confidence was never there in the first place. One of Labour's key pledges at the 2024 election was to make the NHS fit for the future, and one thing that is common knowledge is the antiquated nature of the NHS's data systems. However, there was not a pledge that they would fix any of these problems in a scrupulous manner, and if there's one thing you can guarantee from West Streeting is that the private sector will get a prominent seat at the table for any future NHS policy. Enter the Trump-aligned spy-tech giant Palantir. So comically untrustworthy, they named their company after the all-seeing orb owned by Lord of the Rings antagonist Saruman the White. Like, I hate tech oligarchs, but do they have to be this cringe? They'd been given a £330 million contract in 2023 to run the NHS's federated data platform, a unified database to connect patient data across trusts, ostensibly for a more seamless patient experience. Now, that's all well and good, but this is no ordinary tech company we're dealing with here. Palantir is run by Trump sycophants Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, whose approach to politics and statecraft absolutely terrifying. Thiel himself has argued that those who oppose this tech oligarchy, such as Greta Thunberg and AI skeptics, are legionnaires of the Antichrist. And here's Alex Karp talking about Palantir's role in Israel's genocide in Gaza.
A few people get wealthy, and if you said platitudes that were obviously stupid, you could...
You're getting wealthy off of killing Palestinians. With Palantir kills Palestinians with their AI and technology.
Oh.
You're killing my family in Palestine.
Yeah. And, you know...
What kind of person are you? How do you sleep at night?
Well, if you...
Shame on you.
Do you want to hear my answer?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So, I think the primary cause of death to Palestinians... Okay, do you want to hear the answer, or do you want to yell? Well, you don't want to hear an answer? Obviously. So the primary source of death in Palestine is the fact that Hamas has realized that there are millions and millions of useful idiots that will...
Can we get security up there?
Mostly terrorists, that's true.
Of course, given the Labour government's complicity in the Gaza genocide and total subservience to Trump's tech oligarchy, given the role that firms like Palantir and Oracle have in collaboration with people like the Tony Blair Institute, that's very close to Keir Starmer, such human rights and data privacy concerns over these unscrupulous corporations are of no concern for the Prime Minister, despite the fact that just recently the Swiss government ruled out any contracts with Palantir over data security concerns. Green Party leader Zack Polankski, however, is having none of this, and he was at a demonstration outside Palantir's UK headquarters today calling for the NHS contract to be terminated.
We're outside Palantir today because this is a military surveillance technology company that specialises in artificial intelligence. And for a long time now, they've had a contract with our National Health Service. That contract is up for renewal next year, and I've just delivered a letter that is saying we are putting them on notice. Myself, the Green Party, and all the campaigners here will use every mechanism possible to say get the hell out of our National Health Service. They have no role here, and in fact Louis Mosley, who is their UK boss, is ultimately saying that we are putting ideology over health. Let's talk about the ideology he is putting there. This is an ideology that is deeply authoritarian. We have Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, who has been quite explicit that she wants to have what she called a panopticon of surveillance, and so they will play a role in that. Second, they are deeply complicit, not just complicit, active enablers of the genocide in Gaza. And finally, they are looking to work with ICE. ICE are like a paramilitary organization in the United States, demonizing and murdering people, including Renee Good, who they shot in cold blood just a couple of weeks ago. So we're here as the Green Party and as campaigners of all parties and none to ultimately say this is about making sure that Palantir has no role in the future of our National Health Service.
The comments around ICE are especially pertinent. As their campaign of terror against the US citizenry, ICE are using data procured from the US Department of Health and Human Services to hunt down targets for deportation. This is from 404 Media. Palantir is working on a tool for immigration and customs enforcement that populates a map with potential deportation targets, brings up a dossier on each person, and provides a confidence score on the person's current address, 404 Media has learned. ICE is using it to find locations where lots of people it might detain could be based. The findings, based on an internal ICE material obtained by 404 Media, public procurement records, and recent sworn testimony from an ICE official, show the clearest link yet between the technological infrastructure Palantir is building for ICE and the agency's activities on the ground. The tool receives people's addresses from the Department of Health and Human Services, among a range of other sources, according to the material. This should ring alarm bells for anyone concerned with civil liberties, and given the surveillance state Labour is building with the excuse of it being necessary to deter irregular migration, it is paramount that anything that allows people like Palantir access to our personal information must be resisted at all costs. Palantir UK and Europe boss Louis Mosley, yes, that's the grandson of Oswald Mosley by the way, was on Sky News this morning to respond to Polanski's opposition to the contract.
Clearly, some of the deals or partnerships that have been announced have divided opinion. Palantir is working with the NHS to try and improve efficiencies there. And the latest politician to come out against that has been Zack Polankski. To what extent can you understand people questioning your partnership with NHS, which has so much private information of so many individuals? And what is your response to those criticisms?
Well, the criticisms are based on a misapprehension about the nature of our technology and our business model. So the NHS controls all of the data that the NHS has. They simply use our software to process it, which means Palantir does not have access to that information. We don't monetize that information. We have no business interest in it. And so fundamentally, that criticism is not founded on any kind of truthful premise. And so that means that I frankly, I find it disappointing. I mean, as a Brit, I want the NHS to work. I want it to help me, my family, my friends. And when politicians take an ideological position against a technology that can help patients, by the way, we have helped over the last year 80,000 people in Britain get hospital appointments, treatments, and actually operations that they would not otherwise have got if the technology were not in place. So Zack Polankski is putting ideology over patients.
Now, if I was the grandson of Oswald Mosley, I would not turn up to every single media appearance wearing a black shirt. Maybe that's just me. As for his claims that he wants the NHS to work to help him and his family, are we seriously meant to believe that this guy waits in the queue for an NHS appointment like the rest of us? You'll have to decide for yourself whether you believe him that Palantir won't be able to access data from the new systems. But regardless of the veracity of Mosley's statements, it doesn't clean Palantir's resume of aiding a genocide. And Polanski is clear that they should not get a penny more of public money to continue, saying this in response. Murdering children is bad, Louis. Wes Streeting may have taken over £250,000 in private healthcare donations, but I haven't. So it's quite simple to tell the truth, and there's a graphic there confirming Palantir's relationship with Israel. Dalia, how uneasy does it make you that we have people like Palantir having these kind of contracts with the NHS?
I mean, it makes me incredibly concerned. There's been a lot of conversation around data sovereignty and, data security and how important that is when it comes to our freedom and democracy and curbing the tide of authoritarianism. That conversation was really alive in a quite good way around the digital ID system, because the digital ID cards are sort of a very explicit way in which people feel like this kind of there will be this corporate state alliance to track and surveil everyday people in their everyday lives. And when people feel that is what's happening, they are overwhelmingly against it. Now, digital ID cards are a concern, and I certainly am against them, but it's actually these kind of backdoor ways in which data authoritarianism emerges. It's through having data on every single person, because every single one of us use the NHS, like every single one of us, unless, of course, you are undocumented or you have irregular papers, thanks to the hostile environment. But so many of us use the NHS. It is one of the most, it's like turning a tap and giving access to one of the most brutal, immoral companies in the world, and just giving them access to not only the data that might be collected from us when we shop online or whatever, but data like biometric health data. And the idea that a company that runs the software that the NHS uses, a company as unscrupulous as Palantir, the idea that they would not at some point gain ownership or access over that data is absolutely laughable. And we know as well that this is also, thanks to West Streeting, a form of privatization through the back door. And, no one is more in the pockets of the private healthcare industry than Wes Streeting. I think it's something like 60% of the donations that he has received since he first entered politics in 2015 were from companies or individuals linked to the private healthcare sector. So when we talk about things like the NHS being privatized, we're not saying that one day you're going to wake up and everything's going to be run by Bupa and you're going to have to pay for everything up front. It's a slow incremental process that begins with these kinds of privatizations from the back door. And so there are two problems here. The first one is, and both of them, they throw up two issues that the British public are notoriously in opposition to. The first one is that privatization of the NHS through the back door. So while satisfaction with the NHS is very low at the moment, nonetheless, people still place a huge amount of national pride and value in the NHS. They are passionate about the NHS, they want it to be better, and they want it to continue as a public service. Something like 56% of British people say that the number one source of pride, national pride that they have, is for the NHS. So we're against privatisation. That much is clear. Something that Palantir CEO Peter Thiel once described as Stockholm Syndrome. So he once described the love that British people have and the pride that British people have in the NHS as a public service. He described that as Stockholm Syndrome and has advocated for scrapping the whole thing and building it back up again. So, this is a company run by a man with nothing but contempt for the idea of a public healthcare service. The second is in the form of data sovereignty and the ways in which the corporations and the state are increasingly able to encroach on our civil liberties and on our freedoms through capitalizing on our data, through gathering our data and storing it in a centralized way and processing it in ways that curb our freedoms. And we see how that is happening in the collaboration between Palantir's operations in the health sector and their operations as immigration enforcement within the US. And there's something, and the idea that this is all being advocated by Oswald Mosley's descendant, it's like they are literally saying, we hate the NHS as a public service. We believe that it should be torn down and rebuilt. And we're going to have Oswald Mosley's grandson or whatever tell you how it's such a good idea. I mean, it's unbelievable how explicit it is. But it again comes back to this question. We talked earlier today, earlier in the show, about this kind of corporate authoritarianism within Gaza and how that is going to deny the people of Gaza the ability to decide their own future. We're seeing the exact same relationships, obviously to a different extent, the exact same relationship playing out here. We had the entire Brexit campaign about the question of sovereignty. We're going to throw away all of the things that came with being part of the EU, freedom of movement, etc. And I'm not an uncritical supporter of the EU, but still, we threw all that away only to let Palantir replace what we thought the EU were doing. These are the ways in which not only privatization, but also a scary form of corporate and state-backed authoritarianism is being introduced in a drip-feed manner into our everyday lives. And we might not see the consequences now, we might not see the consequences in 5 years, but in 10, 15 years, the train will have left the station so much, it will be very difficult to bring it back.
There's a lot of confusion around what's being called the Trump deal over Greenland. Though the deal apparently underpins the US president's taking military action over Greenland off the table, as well as his U-turn on tariffs for European countries that opposed his mission to take control of Greenland, the details are unclear, to say the least. Following a meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, Trump described the deal as, quote, the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland. He later went on to say this to reporters. It puts everybody in a really good position, especially as it pertains to security and to minerals. It's a deal that's forever. It's what's called an infinite deal. Mark Rutte was also pretty stingy with details.
Yesterday we came to this understanding that collectively as NATO we have to step up here, including the US. Now, of course, our military will start the planning, but that is something which we are good at. I mean, NATO for 76 years has done this stuff. We have Baltic Sentry, we have Eastern Sentry, we have so many other missions and activities that will be done. And as soon as that is finalized, we have to look where you have to take the decision. Is it in the North Atlantic Council? Is it at the level of the commanders? We'll see. But the most important thing is not the internal decision making. It is that we protect the Arctic region, implementing the President's vision that we need a safe Arctic region.
Now, it has been suggested that Rutte, on behalf of NATO, has suggested that the US might have sovereignty over NATO bases in Greenland. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen was quick to reject that, saying, quote, "We can negotiate on everything political, security, investments, economy, but we cannot negotiate on our sovereignty." Greenland's government was even more robust. This was the territory's Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen speaking earlier today.
First of all, nobody else than Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark have the mandate to make deals or agreements about Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark without us. That's not going to happen. In terms of the deal there's been talking about, I don't know what's concrete in that deal either. But I know that we have now a high-level working group working on a solution for both parties. We have said from the beginning in Greenland, we have some red lines. We cannot cross the red lines. We have to respect our territorial integrity. We have to respect international law, sovereignty. We are ready to cooperate more in economics, in other areas, but that's something we have to talk about in mutual respect.
So no one is very clear about what's going on, what comes next, or what Greenland might have to give up. But despite that, one man seems to want to take credit for lowering the rising global temperature. This was Prime Minister Keir Starmer speaking on a visit to Hertfordshire.
I think you will have noticed that the last few days have been incredibly serious in relation to big things happening on the world stage. And you may have seen, but it is a good thing, that yesterday the threat of tariffs against the United Kingdom was lifted, and now we can start the hard yards of finding a way forward on security in the Arctic, which may seem a long way away, pretty remote, but actually does matter to all of us in terms of the safety and security of our country. And we've got through the last few days with a mix of British pragmatism, common sense, but also that British sense of sticking to our values and our principles.
Is that filmed at Yvette Cooper's house with all the Union Jack bunting in the background? But clearly, Keir Starmer also left out about his Blitz spirit. In a meeting with Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen later in the day, she had a similar message.
So I would like to thank you for your very strong support. I like the British way of doing things. As you said, you are very pragmatic. You have a cup of tea and then you think a bit about everything. You get the facts on the table. And then you find a way forward, and that is exactly what we're doing now. You are one of our UK, not you, but UK is one of our oldest and most important allies and partners. And we are good friends, the two of us. Yeah. So just to finalize, I think we're gonna get by with a little help from our friends.
That was expert diplomacy from Frederiksen, even down to the bit where she said, the UK, not you, is one of our greatest allies. Because in all honesty, Starmer was pragmatic, but he was pragmatic about British interests, sitting outside of the more public opposition to the US's territorial ambitions that other European leaders voiced. So what might really have been behind Trump's step down? Well, one option is the bond markets, the massive anonymous traders who have an outside influence over our politics, with the EU owning $8 trillion in US Treasury bonds. That's almost twice as much as the rest of the world combined. The threat of a sell-off, as well as the vulnerability of American capital markets to foreign investors pulling out if they don't like the political weather, may have played a much more significant role than diplomacy. Dalia, do you think Keir Starmer was a real kind of cog in the opposition to Trump here, or was he like Drake sitting with the basketball team, like bro thinks he's on the team?
Keir Starmer is much like Drake, is the last person to know that he's no longer relevant. and so continues to embarrass himself out of desperation. I think what we're seeing here that's quite interesting is, and I think a lot of European leaders, Keir Starmer included, they're kind of trying to operate in a world that Trump is at least planning on tearing to shreds. And we saw kind of Mark Carney in his talk to Davos, in his speech to Davos, where Mark Carney kind of recognizes that certainly under a Trump presidency, and depending on what a post-Trump America is going to look like, whether it's going to kind of very much continue within that tradition, or whether it's going to try and return back to a pre-Trump era. But Mark Carney kind of has sort of cottoned on that this idea of this inevitable, inherent US, North America, Europe alignment, that it's going to somehow hold strong in this kind of diplomatic, nicey way. Mark Carney's kind of cottoned on that world is being torn up to shreds a little bit. I mean, him saying that the era of a rules-based international order is over. Sure, the era of rules-based international order within countries of the West is certainly beginning to dissipate. Globally, that rules-based order has never really existed evenly, and which Mark Carney did acknowledge in his speech, to be fair to him. Whereas I think that a lot of NATO, Starmer, a lot of European leaders, they're not quite cottoning on to the fact that in Trump's vision of the world, and of the world that he is trying to curate and implement, there are three powers to take seriously: US, China, Russia. So in Trump's vision, the world is carved up between those three global superpowers. And the EU, as far as he's concerned, is kind of the US's playground. And I wonder, and we see it playing out here where sort of Keir Starmer, it's been a long day, Keir Starmer and the Danish leader there sort of saying, like the British way of doing things, diplomacy, having a cup of tea, negotiating, that's what got us out of this, or that's what changed things in a very minor way. No, it was the very hard economic power of the current existing vulnerability of American capital markets to EU movement. Those are the only levers that now exist. This kind of special relationship, culturalist-based relationship or unifying force between Europe and North America is disintegrating, or at least Trump is trying to accelerate its disintegration. I think Mark Carney has cottoned on to that. I don't think that Starmer and some of the other leaders in Europe have really figured out that is what is happening, and therefore the levers that are pulled need to be changed.
I think a lot of what this saga has shown me is that the level of hubris in the Trump administration, that I think they over-adjudicated the level to which that they held all of the cards. Like the Kissinger doctrine of economic inter-alliance being a mandate for stability. It relies upon it going both ways. And I don't think the Trump administration really understood that there is actually a lot of political and economic power that the EU has, even if it's not as powerful as the United States on its own, which is enough to push back on things like the US being belligerent over Greenland, for example. Like Denmark, their pension fund started dropping treasuries, that Denmark could shut down Maersk from global shipping, and that could immediately isolate the United States. Maersk is like 20% of global shipping. So there is a lot of economic power that is held in Europe, even if it's not the same as the kind of the belligerent economic power that's been wielded by the United States. Europe was a colonial power for a very long time and still benefits from kind of comprador capitalism in the modern economy anyway, which is more of a reason why it's got such a good welfare state rather than the security envelope of America that they claim as about but benevolent projection from Europe rather than the use of Europe as a geostrategic asset in the area within that region. And so people like Besant and Miller thought, well, we can get away with anything. We can use our belligerence and no one has any power against us. And the reality is, actually, people do have power against the United States. What's important is being able to show that you can use that power to be able to stand up to what Donald Trump says, stand up to the bully, which is what we've learned from all of this, or we should have learned, is that if you give them an inch, they'll start thinking they can take a mile. And that's where Starmer has failed in standing up to Trump by essentially capitulating at every turn and just crossing fingers and hoping it will all go away, only for the actual pushback to come from other people, from Mark Carney, from Fredrickson. And I think this is what we need to learn moving forward, that if we actually do show Trump a little bit of a backbone, a little bit of spine, actually he'll be more amenable and his administration will be more amenable to realising that they don't actually hold all the cards that they think they do. Thank you, Dalia, for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me, Helena. It was wonderful to be in conversation with you as always.
The feeling is, as always, mutual too. Thank you everyone at home for tuning in as always. Come back tomorrow for another live stream at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.